Hey guys, welcome to episode 5 of TFL's Talking Trucks. And today we have a very special show for you because we've got 2 very special guests. Besides Andre, say hi, Andre.
Hey guys.
We have Trevor Dorchy, who is kind of the media guy for Jeep. And our special guest is Pete Milo, or Peter Miloskovitsky. Is that right? Did I say that right?
Yeah, almost Roman. Miloslavsky.
Miloslavsky. Thank you, Pete.
Now you got it. Perfect.
He is a chief engineer on both the Gladiator and on the Wrangler. And so we're going to be delving deep into all things Jeep on this episode. And we're going to be talking about the Mojave. We're going to be talking about Desert Rated. We're going to find out kind of what FCA was thinking when they designed this Jeep.
Thank you for joining TFL Talking Trucks podcast. If you love pickup trucks or big full-size SUVs, if you love trailering, towing, and going off-road, this is the right place to be. Together we can make this podcast the most popular ever.
So Andre, I'm going to let you take over, and why don't you ask the first question? Go for it.
Yeah, so basically, Pete, what we did was we wanted to use some of the questions we get from our audience as well, and to kind of get the best bang for the money, right? With this discussion, and I wanted to start out first with what is the Gladiator, because a lot of the things we hear usually is that it's a longer Wrangler with a bed. So can you kind of start us from the top about the Gladiator?
Sure. Yeah, with that description, I would have the easiest job in the world, but that's exactly what it's not. It's not just a Wrangler with a bed. It's a mid-sized pickup that's 100% Jeep, but also 100% truck. So we developed the Gladiator to be the most capable mid-sized truck in the segment from a truck perspective for towing and payload, but also with the Jeep Wrangler DNA that it has, it is the most capable off-road truck in the segment. So Jeep DNA is all about off-road, wheeling, slow speed. But with the Mojave, which we'll touch on here in a minute, we're kind of taking this to an all-new level. So again, it's 100% Jeep, 100% truck. But first and foremost, when we brought it to market, we wanted to make sure that it met the truck customer needs. So it's got the 5-foot bed, it's got the truck capability that we mentioned with the 1,700-pound payload, up to a 7,650-pound towing capability. So you can tow and haul all your goods and your things you want to do on the weekend with the truck. And then as far as the weekend adventures, you've got that too. So it's the best of both worlds.
So Pete, let me ask you, I think the Wrangler is 3,500 towing, right? Half of the Gladiator. So how do you go from 3,500 to 7,600? What do you have to do from an engineering point of view, both from engine management and chassis management, to get that much more towing capability?
Yeah, so the Jeep Gladiator, like most other truck OEMs, meets SAE J2807, which is a guideline for towing in the industry. The Gladiator and the Wrangler both utilize the Pentastar V6 engine. It's the 3.6-liter Pentastar with the 8-speed automatic. So what is it about the rest of the vehicle system that allowed us to get there? Well, it has to do with cooling and getting the right amount of airflow through the cooling system. So we opened up the front grille, increased the grille slots, or what we call the grille texture, to increase the cooling flow. And then on top of that, we introduced the Class 4 hitch, and there's a number of things we had to do with the chassis in terms of tuning to ensure our understeer performance met the standards. So really it was focused both on cooling and dynamics, and then all the other things that come along with towing trailers, like a hitch and the 7-way connector and trailer sway control.
But Pete, can you talk a little bit more about kind of the chassis, the frame, and the suspension setup? Because I think that's kind of where the difference comes in when you look at like the Wrangler versus Gladiator.
Yeah, so when we migrated or evolved into the Gladiator, the rear suspension is essentially all unique. We borrowed heavily from the Ram 1500 rear suspension. The control arms, in fact, are common with the Ram 1500. The rear track bar is also a family of the Ram 1500. But what we did is we introduced forward-facing shocks, similar again to the Ram 1500, to ensure that we had the right stability. We introduced progressive rate springs so that even when the vehicle is loaded up, it still had the handling capability that you would expect of a truck. So the entire rear suspension was redeveloped both from a hardware standpoint, similar to the 1500, and then it was retuned to make sure that we met all the dynamics requirements for this truck customer.
Yeah, obviously, we just did a video where we said, what's better off-road, a car or a truck? And we said that the Jeep Wrangler was the car. I know Mark Allen, the Jeep designer, calls it a wagon. But the Wrangler is kind of a unique animal, right? It's really not a car. It's really not a truck. It's really not a crossover. It's kind of its own thing. I mean, you can't really categorize it in any of those three classic categories because it's very unique, and it always has been from the get-go. But one of the things that you've done in a Wrangler, obviously, is you've basically created kind of three flavors of it, right? So you've always had the base sport, which was kind of the entry level. Let's just go out and have the fun of a convertible Jeep. Then you had the Sahara, which, for lack of better description, is more of a city slicker Jeep. And then you had the Rubicon, which was always the one that the guys wanted when they wanted to go rock crawling or do some kind of heavy duty off-roading. And that one has always been trail rated. So let's go over what trail rated means before we start talking about the new designation, which is desert rated. So what's trail rated mean in a Wrangler and in a Gladiator?
Yeah, so the Wrangler, as you mentioned, Roman, definitely defines its own class. It's in a class of its own. And early on in the development of the Wrangler, many years ago, we established the trail rating methodology or the trail rating system. So trail rating is a set of metrics that we co-developed with the engineering team, and basically it monitors and measures the functional performance of the vehicle when you're off-roading. So there's certain categories that we assign points to that we then calculate and compare ourselves relative to other vehicle lines or internal programs as well. So some of these key categories are, attractive capability or attractive effort, ground clearance, articulation, a category we call Jeepness, and maneuverability. So all of these areas are then they have a series of tests and formulas associated within each one of these categories, where the team goes out and actually tests vehicles, whether it's at our proving grounds or whether it's at different trails throughout the country, where we'll take measurements and we'll compare and contrast, calculate the total points of the system and then apply a total trail rating score for the Jeep Wrangler.
Where do you go off-roading?
Right?
Which trails? I mean, can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, we have internal proving grounds test hills or test facilities that we've developed that are based on trails that we've been throughout the country, and then we have trails that we go to. There's some go-to trails that is somewhat proprietary that we don't want to get into necessarily here today, but we do have a set of trails that we like to push the vehicle on and put the vehicle through its paces. And then again, we'll take these sheets out with us with the different categories and the different metrics, and we'll measure the Wrangler and some other programs to make sure that we're scoring where we would anticipate that we would score from an off-road, slow speed, rock crawling, mud bogging perspective.
Okay, so that's trail rated. So with the Mojave, you came up with an entire new designation, which is called desert rated, and kind of walk us through what that means and how that's changed from being trail rated.
Yeah, so with the Mojave, we originally planned the Mojave from the onset of the program. It was always part of the program. And early on through the development process, the Jeep customer does like to go through the desert in high speed. We knew that about the Jeep customer. But this segment has grown. So early on, we went out, we surveyed, we went to different enthusiast events, like score events like the Mint 400 and some others. And upon taking this information, we determined that we needed to create a similar rating methodology to the trail rating system, where we could determine whether we meet the standards of Jeep for the desert environment. So whereas trail rating is slow speed rock crawling, desert rating is high speed driving, flying through the sand, and basically being able to push the vehicle to its limits in the desert environment. And so we developed, I'll call it 5 categories: tractive capability, ride control, ground clearance, maneuverability, and what we call desert prowess. And all of these categories we measure ourselves. We measure ourselves for these different categories, and we rate ourselves for these different categories. And so, really, the distinction between the two, even though they're based on each other, one is slow speed rock crawling, where the other one is high speed, managing the speed, managing the terrain, and going fast in the desert.
So now you've got a whole set of different criteria, right? You've got a truck that instead of going, let's say, up Hell's Revenge, is designed to go flying across the desert at high speed. So what does that mean in terms of equipment? What did you change on the truck?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. Number one, durability is inherent in every vehicle we develop and build. And although I didn't mention durability in our desert rating system, it just expected, the customer expects durability. And early on through our development process, we determined that we needed to develop a new duty cycle to ensure that this Mojave survives the challenges of that terrain. And so that was the first thing we did, is we developed a durability duty cycle within our proving grounds that tests the vehicle from a durability perspective. We put some of our competitors on this duty cycle as well to understand where our competitors currently stood with respect to how it performs from a durability perspective. And from that, we started to develop some of our systems to ensure that it met the requirements that this customer would expect, that this customer driving in the desert and then on road and back in the desert on the weekends or what have you, would have a truck that could, stand up to those trials. And so with that, we made some changes. We made some modifications to the frame. We made some enhancements to the frame, strengthened the frame in certain areas. We went to a cast iron knuckle. The front axle tube was increased in thickness. And that actually carried over to the Rubicon, but at the time of the Rubicon launch, we couldn't necessarily announce that. But the Mojave was the one that really drove that change into the Rubicon, because again, those events are pretty tough, and they challenge the vehicle. We reinforced the box. We went to a steel box. There were some questions. Well, why didn't you go to composite? Well, this was one of the things that we co-developed with the normal program and realized early up front we needed steel. We needed it to be tough. So that's the durability part. And now on the performance side, tractive capability, ride control, those were the 2 key categories that were important to us. And from a ride control perspective, it boiled down to changing the suspension in a way that the customer can go through the desert, go through these different events that they experience at high speeds, keeping them comfortable and keeping them confident. So some of the things we introduced are internal bypass shocks, working, co-developing with Fox. We went to an internal bypass shock, and we went to a front hydraulic jounce bump can. And both of these hardware enhancements give the driver and the customer that comfort level, that confidence as they're going through the desert, going through these extreme events, that they're not going to bottom out or they're not going to tap out, and they can continue to go over these sudden whoops that come up at you, or these sudden speed bumps that are in the desert. We also introduced reservoir shocks to keep the shocks cool so that there's no shock fade, over time. So, the chassis, the frame, all those things were modified to ensure that the desert enthusiast customer that's going to take this thing out is going to be pretty happy with the vehicle.
And why did you decide to delete the sway bar disconnect and the front locker?
It's a good question. I think the question is, at that point, what's the difference between the Rubicon and the Mojave? And the focus of this particular Mojave was going fast in the desert and to keep the weight out of the vehicle. And that's the other thing about tractive capability. You want to keep the vehicle as light as possible, so minimize weight where you can. So that was a focus of ours, is to really cater this towards desert performance. And so all those other things that the Rubicon has for rock crawling and ultimate articulation, we didn't necessarily need on the Mojave. The other aspect of that is we're able to keep the cost down a little bit more. We're not adding on additional content that the customer doesn't necessarily need on the Mojave.
Yeah, and the suspension is pretty unique on the Mojave truck. I was just looking at the front axle. We had the truck at our offices for about a week, and the remote reservoir, it's really hidden by the front skid plate. I've never seen kind of that separation before from where the shock is, kind of by the axle, right by the spring, and then kind of where the remote reservoir is. So it seemed like how much time did it take, to put it all together? You said Mojave was from the onset. Are we talking about years of development here?
Absolutely. Yeah. It was an all-new duty cycle that we developed. And then from that standpoint, all-new packaging. We haven't ever introduced a remote reservoir like that. So in the rears, the remote reservoirs are co-located with the shock, but in the front, because the shocks are larger, they're a 2.5-inch shock. Packaging became tight, especially with the Jeep rugged wheel and tires that we have. We have the 33-inch Falcon tires that take up a lot of space, and we had to protect the right envelopes and the right steer angles. So that was the optimal location, is to put those reservoirs up front near that skid plate, and then add this cool hydraulic line that a lot of our customers and our internal engineers thought that was really cool to showcase that line that goes to the front reservoirs, and where the reservoirs are tucked in. It's a pretty cool spot as well.
Hey, Trevor, I know, this is kind of a desert runner. Any thought on the part of Jeep to actually race the truck? Is there any been discussion around that?
Nothing moving forward, but I'm sorry, I'm kind of listening in and out, but Pete, if you already talked about this, like the Mint 400, we actually had within the company, actually raced with Mel Wade in one of our trucks. Then we had another truck do another, I think it was I forget the name of the race now, but there are a couple races that we've had that we've lent.
King of Hammers.
Yep, King of the Hammers, that was one of them. That we've lent some chassis to, but there have been nothing like a Jeep factory backed anchor yet.
Okay, it just seems like this truck is perfect for that kind of a setup. It feels like it's designed for that world. And speaking of design for that world, we had Jim Morrison on our podcast, on our car podcast last week, and I asked him, did you ever think about putting a Hemi in there? And he said, let's keep talking. So I'm going to ask you the same thing, Pete.
Let's keep talking.
Yeah, I was going to say, can I steal Jim's line?
You can.
I think there's a segment of our Wrangler customer base that have been talking about V8 or Hemi and the Jeep Wrangler for a long time. So I'm all for it. I'd love to drive it. I'd love to own one. So I'll also work on Jim on that one.
Okay, so it's his decision at the end, I suspect, huh?
Well,
Jim and Mike.
One note on the racing I should just bring up is, and give a shout out to one of my engineers, Alex Tonkovich, who did work with Mel Wade, and they won the Mint 400 stock class this year. So, I mean, that gives you a feel for some of the enthusiasts that we have in our group that actually take their vacation time and go out and race with some professional, experienced drivers. So I'd like to see more of that. And I know my boss, John Rosowski, is working with Jim to see if we can get more activities in some of these stock class score events. That would be really cool.
Yeah, I just wanted to continue on kind of the power line a little bit, and because I love towing, so I just wanted to touch on.
I know you do, Andre.
I wanted to touch
we have
on
Mr. Truck. You can be Mr. Tow, Andre.
Yeah, you're Mr. Tow.
Mr. Tower.
Never mind. That's got a different connotation.
Okay, we won't go there. But basically, so I heard this complaint from some of the audiences that we publish our videos and articles. They said, well, how come Jeep kept kind of the same power rating on the 3.6 V6 from the Wrangler to the Gladiator? If the Gladiator is a little bit heavier vehicle, it needs to tow a little bit more, but the power is not quite there. I mean, we've tested the Gladiator several times, as you know, on the Ike Gauntlet, our towing test, the world's toughest. The truck performs, and we loaded it almost to the max. We don't go easy on trucks here at TFL. But are there any thoughts to like increasing that gas power? And can you say anything about the diesel upcoming?
Right now, we share the powertrain with the Wrangler, so it's the 3.6 liter 8-speed, and the axles for the most part are the internal gearing, the ring gears, the sizing, all of that is shared with Wrangler, and because of that, the power rating, the horsepower and torque rating is similar or common with the Jeep Wrangler. And what you may be referring to is the weight difference. So because of the weight difference, maybe it doesn't feel as peppy as the Wrangler. But from a towing perspective, we've been all across the country towing, and as you said that, I was confident that our Gladiator can handle 7,000, 7,600 pounds, which for a mid-sized truck is a lot of weight. It can handle some of the biggest E-Class trailers as well. So I'm very confident in the towing performance and that our customers will be very satisfied. Some of the stuff that you're talking about, Andre, and I've seen many of your videos, is pretty extreme stuff, and I'm glad to hear that you had positive comments about our towing too. So appreciate that. As far as the diesel, the Wrangler EcoDiesel came out early this year, and it's been a hit. The range is phenomenal. The fuel economy on that thing's amazing with the 29 mile per gallon highway. And as you know, the Gladiator EcoDiesel is also going to be coming to hopefully sometime later this calendar year. So with that, it's going to have similar fuel economy performance. We don't have it rated through the EPA yet, so I can't get into details, but it's also going to give our customers that great balance of additional torque, 442 pound-feet of earth-chewing torque, and which will be great off-road, but also while towing, they have that torque reserve while getting this amazing fuel economy in this highway range. So I'm really excited for those customers that want that to have that opportunity.
My call on the diesel, we have one right now parked in front of our offices, and I've kind of gone through this. When I first drove it, I really fell in love with it, and then when we got to the payload numbers, when we first had it, the payload is pretty low because I think that engine, you would know this, is very heavy, and so you're I think, what's the payload on that thing? Is it like 850 pounds? Is that right, Pete? 850? Does that sound?
Well, it's
close. It sounds all right for the diesel, yeah.
Yeah, 850. Which you put 4 big guys and a big dog, and you're kind of that payload, especially if it's wet.
That's a big dog.
yeah, big dog. And but now that we've had it the second time, and we've actually had it longer in the offices, I've really learned to appreciate just how the bandwidth of that power plant, right? How it goes from 0 to 60 I think it's got to be, if not the fastest, one of the fastest Wranglers. It's just extremely powerful. And then when you're off-roading with it, how it just, like takes everything in stride because it doesn't care, right? There's just kind of just does its thing. And I got to tell you, I just did a video where I said that the Jeep that I'm really looking forward to is a Gladiator with the diesel in it. So the reason I brought all this up is I thought to myself, a lot of people like to customize their Wranglers, right? It's like a Harley. People love to make it their own. And one of the first things they do is they, of course, lift it, and then they put bigger wheels and tires on it. And you do that, big enough, and you eventually end up running out of power and torque. And the diesel seems to solve that problem. So have you guys actually put on like big old tires on a diesel, and how does it do when you do that with, a much bigger, more custom kind of setup for a rig? Because people will do that.
Absolutely. And we package protect, when we designed and developed the Wrangler Gladiator, we package protected for 35-inch tires. But even beyond that, 37s, 42s, the diesel can handle them, without issue. I mean, that additional torque, you're right, Roman, just gives you that additional torque reserve you need to move those large wheels. So I agree with you.
I have a couple more questions.
I have a couple more questions about towing.
Yeah,
I gotta get the towing stuff.
Yes.
So one thing that's unique about the Gladiator and I believe the Wrangler is there is no like driver selectable tow haul mode. Is that true?
That's correct. It's all integrated into the software, if you will.
So how does that work?
Engine software.
How does the truck know that I'm towing?
Well, there's a complex set of logarithms that our calibrators use that monitor different parameters within the engine, whether it's manifold air pressure, airflow. There's different parameters that the calibrators use that sense whether the vehicle's towing or not, and then from that they'll go into an overdrive mode or an overdrive cal. They'll adjust accordingly. So in our mind, there was although I call it full-size truck customers who want to press that button, we can accomplish nearly the same thing with the software that our calibrators were able to implement by monitoring these parameters.
And to kind of go along with that, also, I mean, you're saying that the Gladiator is a proper midsize truck, right? Are there any thought to also offering optional towing mirrors? I've heard this question a couple of times come up where people want more accessories. They want to customize their trucks, and if they're towing a trailer, maybe a wider mirror makes sense.
Yeah, agree. And I think what we wanted to do is bring it to market, get some customer feedback because this is primarily a lifestyle vehicle. Although we developed the Gladiator to tow up to 7,650 pounds, which is E-Class trailer, and with an E-Class trailer, you're going to want those trailer tow mirrors. That's something that we're working with our planning team in the future to potentially offer, whether it's a solution that we provide or whether it's an aftermarket or Mopar solution.
That's cool. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
In terms of kind of the Mojave, do you see a different customer buying that versus the Rubicon, or is it the same person but they want more of a desert runner? I mean, you must have done some market research. How does that kind of differentiate?
Well, I think the customer base is fairly similar. They're enthusiasts. They want the lifestyle. They work hard during the week, and then on the weekends or their vacations, they want to go anywhere. But the distinction is this is a little bit different type of customer. Now, you got some they'll want to do both. They'll want to do some rock crawling, and they'll want to go running through the desert. But there is a distinction. There is a segment of customers that are catered towards the weekend warrior going out in the sand, running in the sand dunes. And that's what they love to do. And so that is a slightly different customer that Mojave is catered to.
Yeah, I figured. I mean, you guys got dunes in Michigan. Obviously, people out in California are running these things up and down dunes. It seems like a different, similar person, but kind of different activity at the end of the day.
And one other interesting thing that I should mention is that the Mojave is still very capable of going off-road. We took it with us to the Rubicon Trail as an example. Just because it doesn't have a front locker doesn't mean the thing isn't capable. I mean, with the 33-inch tires, the rear lockers, the BLD controls, the clearances that we have, it really is. It just gives you that additional desert running capability. On the contrary, this goes for both Wrangler and Gladiator. The Rubicon version is also capable of running in the sand. But the difference is, do you want that extreme use case? Do you want to run through the desert and have that ultimate capability? Then you're going to gear towards the Mojave. If you want that ultimate capability on the rocks, you're going to gear towards the Rubicon. But both can really, still do very well in those other environments.
Pete, on our off-road channel, we do a lot of testing of side-by-sides, and side-by-sides are kind of setting the bar now for off-roading. And it has a lot to do with the dynamics of side-by-side, right? Lots of power, a little bit of weight. I mean, it's kind of ideal for it. But both in the side-by-side world and, one of your competitors has gone to active shocks now. And it seems to be kind of the high watermark. Have you guys thought about doing active shocks? I know Fox specifically does them for both Polaris and for one of the competitors out there. And I'm talking about the Raptor.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that. I'm just going to say it.
Yeah. I mean, certainly there's always discussions about new technologies and the competitive set, what the competition is doing, but we're extremely happy with the financial, the cost basis of the system that we have. Once you start going adaptive, it starts getting complicated, expensive, and our customers just want the performance. They don't need all of those expensive, they don't need all that. They don't need all the frills. They just want the capability. They want the basics, and they just want to go out on the weekends, have a good time, and not have to worry about something getting damaged. And that's what we focused on, is giving our customers what they want. And in this case, we think we have.
Thank you. And Andrew, any other questions before we wrap this up?
Yeah, talking about complications, I want to talk about one more item. I think there are two camps out there, right? People who really love solid axles and the performance that solid axles offer you, front and rear. That's what Gladiator has. And some other guys like an independent suspension, maybe independent front, independent rear. How does that play into this? Because a desert runner, to me, especially if you look at some of the Polaris Razors side-by-sides, some of the other off-road proper racing trucks, not street trucks, they offer independent suspensions. How does that play into it? And did you ever consider independent suspension for Mojave, for example?
Yeah, I think from a solid axle versus independent front suspension standpoint, there's this conception out there that independent front suspension is far superior. And I understand why people say that, but I just look at the Mint 400 stock class that we just that Gladiator just performed well in, and I look from our internal testing of a desert rating. From a ride control perspective, the solid axle, you can do a lot with a solid axle, and so I'm absolutely confident that our dynamics team, our tuning team, was able to compensate for any shortfalls that a solid axle may have versus an independent front suspension. You start putting independent front suspensions on Jeeps, you've just got another, and I won't name names, but you've just got another independent front suspension besides pickup. What makes Jeep special is that we are different, we are unique, and we're the most capable, and that solid axle plays a big part of it. And don't expect that to go away anytime soon.
I couldn't agree more. I would think Andre would agree too that you could do a lot with a traditional Hemi V8 too. That's another one that
I love it.
would add
I'm all about that. Only if I had some additional pull in that category, Roman. I'll have to talk to the powers that be. I'll say, I'll have to tell them, hey, Roman really asked for this. He really wants it.
Well, I'm not. It's just not me. It's every time we do a video, I got to tell you, there's like at least 10-20% of the viewers out there are saying put a Hemi in it. And now with gas prices being where they are, it's certainly much more palatable. But anyway, you guys know that. I don't need to be preaching to the choir here. Andre, any last questions before we thank the boys for joining us on this podcast?
Once again, I wanted to thank you guys because we're kind of going through some tough times right now. But we had the truck and we did a few tests with it, so we really appreciate it. And Pete, I did tow with the Mojave. That video is not out yet. I did tow with it. Not super heavy, but around 5,000 pounds. And that video will be coming soon, too.
Well, guys, thanks for joining us. Trevor, thank you for jumping on the call. Pete, thank you for jumping on the call. Mr. Tow, love to have you, as always, on the Hangout, actually. And, guys, check this out wherever podcasts are for free. All of the usual places like Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your free podcasts. We really appreciate you guys joining us. We really appreciate our friends over at Jeep for giving us an inside look into what makes the Mojave the Mojave. Thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciate it, and see you guys next time. Ciao.
Thank you.
Thanks, TFL team. Great talking to you.